Humans of Earth, welcome to Will AI Snap That? I am your host, Michael Rollins, and I am here with my co-host, Thanos, he of the Snapdom, where we will help you understand your... oh, crap, Thanos, I screwed it up again. You had me thinking about AI overlords versus robotic... All right, I'm going to get back into it. We help you understand whether you're... screw it.
Let's just roll with it.
There's something here about robotic overlords, and we're going to help you curry favor. And you are, yeah, we're here for you.
We should use this intro every time now.
I should. I absolutely should. And that is the intro that we are going to go with. So Thanos, today we are joined by a good friend of mine, mentor, former boss, just general boy, is Sean Byrnes. Let's get a round of applause for Sean.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I have not been referred to as a boy in a very long time, despite the fact that I'm only 25 years old, so I appreciate the respect.
Son boy.
As a quick aside, I mean, I've been a founder for a long time. I'm no longer 35, but when I was 35, I was on a panel at a conference about over-the-hill founders, about what is it like to be an over-the-hill founder. And I was 35. That was a long time ago, by the way. And the very first thing in the intros of this panel, they were like, introduce yourself. I'm like, I would like to say that I don't belong here. I refuse to believe that I'm over the hill. That might be true now, though. I'm not sure.
I am fairly certain that you are officially, by the definition, over the hill now, Sean. do you think, all right, just real quick, total side note, do you think there's still a bias against older founders?
Oh, I think there's a bias against older people in general, across the board. I don't think it's isolated to any specific. It's ironic, though, because older founders are proven, statistically speaking, that they create more successful companies at a higher rate. And so there's a bias, but I don't think the good news is that it clearly is easily overcome if that's still the case.
So Sean, tell us a little bit about you. You're like a real Silicon Valley kind of big guy. Big boy?
That's not true, but okay, a little bit about me. 25 years ago, I went to grad school for AI, which is hilarious because it was a bad idea to do it back then. We used to joke in the graduate program that the work we were doing was not going to be relevant in our lifetimes. And of course, 20 years later, it turns out it arrived, which is nice, a lot sooner than we thought it would. We thought it'd be our children's children that would benefit, and it turns out maybe not. I spent the first 20 years of my career as a founder and CEO of companies, mostly in the data analytics and AI spaces. Flurry, which was one of the largest analytics companies in the world, doing analytics for mobile apps. Outlier, which was the first automated analysis company using machine learning to find insights in large data sets. Despite all my best intentions, the companies ended up being fairly successful, which I appreciate. And along the way, I coached a lot of companies and enjoyed investing in startup companies, coaching startup founders. And about 2 years ago, I started a new kind of venture firm called New Horizon, where we work with mid-career solo founders, people like ourselves who have ideas. And we don't just invest capital in these companies when they're being formed. We jump in and become part of the founding team. And so I jump in there and my partners jump in there. There's 3 of us. And we do everything from the customer research, design, build the product, early go-to-market and sales, everything that takes to get from 0 to 1. And it's a lot of fun because it's kind of a combination of my founding skills and now a more portfolio-based approach. We don't have a big portfolio because we get so involved, but it's fun to work on lots of problems that, I'm not necessarily the CEO of in interesting areas as AI is changing the world. All of our companies, we don't sell AI, but AI is the core of what makes the companies interesting. And so I get to see everything from how AI is changing healthcare, biopharma, all the way over to like trust and safety and everything else in between. It's fascinating work.
Yeah. You guys actually are helping us at Engine Room, which is phenomenal and a huge help. So wait, does that mean you may still write code sometime, Sean?
I actually write code quite often. Yeah, we get in there and I will say that it's funny because I'm used to, again, all the companies that I started were my ideas. And when it's your idea, you usually have a good product sense of what the solution might look like. And it might change, but at least you're coming from, I'm the founder, I'm maybe the CEO. I have this kind of clarity to a world where I'm helping build the first versions of products that I don't know anything about them. Like there's one of the companies in our portfolio that has since graduated and gone on to great things. It's called Sleep Insights. They do automated biopharma data analysis. So if you're a biopharma, like a pharmaceutical company, you want to understand the market, all these clinical trials, all these drug candidates, how's it going to shift? And when we first started working on it, I had to ask basic questions like, what's a clinical trial and how does it work? I had nothing. And so it's fun, and you get to build, but you get to build things in new spaces and learn new things. So it's great. And I will say this, I used to say I was a very rusty, mediocre developer. And with the rise of AI tools, I am not, it's not true anymore. I'm actually quite a good developer now. And not because I practice and not because I do it a lot.
It's because the AI's doing it. So what was interesting is, Thanos and I have been like exploring what the heck is AI going to do to, specifically the job market, but just kind of, society in general. And I have seen all these hot takes from all of these, Silicon Valley moguls that, Mark Zuckerberg's talking about how, and they're just going to get rid of engineers. And, one of the ones I had seen recently, which I had to go back and revise my opinion of because I actually think I agree with it now, was I think it might have been the CEO of Anthropic who said that engineers will no longer need to write code, but they will need to be able to read it and review it. And, I've seen Eric Schmidt make some pretty wild, pronouncements. And so I posted on LinkedIn. I was like, anybody else notice that the folks that are telling us that software engineering is going away are folks that haven't written code in a long time? And so Sean, as he is wont to do, pops up into, and he's like, well, actually, and he hit me with this TechCrunch article that said, more or less that for the fiscal 25 TechCrunch class, or not, Y Combinator class, over a quarter of the startups have over 98% of their code written by AI. And it was pretty wild. And so I think Thomas and I on the same weekend, I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to go see if I can do this. And I came up with a project, which I'll explain to you a little bit later, Sean, because it's near and dear to your heart. And I said, I'm not going to write a line of code. And so I jumped into Cursor and I made Cursor do all the hard work, and it worked. And
minus that little deleted all your code thing.
Well, yeah, there was.
Yeah, there's that tiny little.
The project was code name cover my tracks, delete everything in the case that anybody finds my browser history, and it works.
So you know how you can, because I was in a PyEnv environment, Cursor could just run commands in the terminal for me, which for whatever reason it doesn't like to do in other instances, but whatever.
You did have to click on that button that is labeled YOLO mode.
Yeah, but okay, but here's the thing. Yeah, if you go into Cursor and it'll ask you to accept, but then there's a little button over to the side that says YOLO. Just let Cursor do it. That is a bad button, apparently. But I actually was not in YOLO mode, and I asked Cursor to commit and push a bunch of changes. And then something weird happened, and it ended up throwing a git clean -df, forced to clean, and it had not committed the client. So the client just disappeared. I was like, what the? So mad.
But you have to admit, Mike, 0 lines of code that you wrote were lost. So
I don't feel like that doesn't really make me feel better. The funny thing is, go ahead.
I was going to say, you hit an interesting thing, right? Which is, what does it mean to write code at this point? So when we say you just went in complete vibe mode and you just let it do its thing, is that you writing code, or is that it writing code? Or if you're actually giving it continuous prompts and refining what it's writing to a point where it actually becomes maintainable, is that it writing code now, or is that you writing code? And I would argue, like, if you're completely vibe mode, then it's writing code. But if you're continuing to guide it and refine the architecture and refine the patterns so you end up with something maintainable, that's kind of you using the autocomplete, and you're kind of writing the code.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the history of programming in general, I'm old enough to remember all the way back to the earliest programming and, assembly language. And we have created further and further abstractions to make development easier. I mean, people, even if you're a computer science student, you don't learn about things like memory management. Not really. You don't have to do, you don't even have to really understand how garbage collection works, because garbage collection has gotten so good that you don't have to worry about it. And also, machines have so much memory. And so I have always thought that this new generation is the next layer of abstraction, right? Where in the same way that modern programming languages are so far afield from assembly language and the origins of how we used to program computers, that they don't represent each other even a little bit. That's what this next generation is that you're really just finding a level of abstraction. Now, every level of abstraction comes with cost, right? You can't
Like
use
non-determinism.
JavaScript. Like, you can't use JavaScript to manage memory. And so if you had to, you still can't do it, right? It's just, you give that up. And so this next layer of abstraction has pros and cons, but you're still programming, you're still developing. It's just a lot faster.
I want to find out the person that decided that they're going to use the tab button that actually used to indent code to be also the autocomplete button for the AI. Because I had this complex piece of code, and at some point, and I remember I writing like a third else statement today, and then a little bit later, that else statement was just gone. I'm like, no, wait a second, I had some like logic there. So it's funny because it's a nicer, high level of abstraction, but in some ways it's not deterministic. Like, it might do the same thing different ways, different times, as opposed to kind of what we had before, which was more deterministic abstractions that you're building on higher and higher things, right? So the challenges are different, and we haven't quite figured those out yet. So that's kind of exciting.
Are we sure about that? I mean, I would go back. I don't think a lot of people understand how a JavaScript engine works, for example, and how memory management works in the JavaScript engine. But it didn't matter as much because there were plenty of ways to kind of navigate around it. Like, I would
bigger CPUs and more memory.
Exactly.
On computers, which is why Safari takes 2 gigs of RAM on my machine.
Exactly. So it's just, I suspect the same problems exist. They're as unfamiliar because we're new to them. And as we get more familiar, we start to look out on it. It's like, but to your point, it's hilarious that the tab key was originally in Unix. You have to go back to the original Unix operating system to figure out why the tab became the completion button. But it's hilarious that would still be the convention now in AI coding, right? Like, why are we inheriting something from 40 years ago as a convention today?
Here's a question I keep asking myself over and over, and it has to do with this idea of abstraction, right? Are we at a moment where we're going from something like an assembly language to a more abstracted language by a couple orders of magnitude? Are we in a moment where we're going from punch cards to mouse and keyboard? Because those two jumps are very different.
Well, the punch card to mouse and keyboard was a change in the user interface of computers. That's not the same thing as how you build the programs. At least I don't think it's the same. I think it's different. I do think it's as significant as a leap from assembly code to compilers, or compilers to virtual machines. I do think it's equivalent to that it allows you to develop software in an extremely different way, different level, without having to worry about a lot of things we used to worry about. It used to be. It wasn't even that long ago that, like, when I was, like, you go back to even the early 90s, it was still the case you were probably programming in C or C++. And a lot of people would still, even after the compiler ran, would still go into the assembly code to make optimizations, right? It wasn't even that long ago you were doing that. And these days, there's almost no reason to do that. And that's probably going to be true right now. These vibe coding AI tools are writing code that we can then interrogate and say, do we agree with what it did? I suspect there's a point in the not distant future where we're not going to look at the code. We're just going to test it and see if it passes all the tests and does what we want. If it does, it's great. If not, we'll send it to go back and try again.
No, that's interesting you say that, because I've been kind of mulling that over a lot. And I kind of go back and forth on that, because for me, part of software development is taking something that is abstract, right? You have a spec or an idea of a feature of something you want to build, and then going through the creative process of making that very concrete, because code is like super concrete, right? It will run or it won't run, it will crash, and it has to do something for every path you may go down. And I think the thought process of translating the thoughts to code makes you think of like, oh, there's this path, oh, there's that path, oh, what do I do in this situation, right? So it feels like we're kind of like maybe skipping this, right? Because the AI did something. I didn't think through it because it didn't force me to do so. I just hit tab and it just did something. I can see the results, but it may be a lot later that I found out that, oh shit, there's something in the middle that I didn't think about and it just assumed something. And my role as an engineer maybe should have been to think through that and like put something concrete there rather than just do whatever the AI did. Now, at the same time, if the AI does mostly the right thing and it has enough context to do what I would have done had I thought through it, great, level of abstraction success. I suspect in the beginning it may be like a little more messy than that. What do you guys think?
Well, I think it depends on how fast you think it'll get better. So, for example, if you try to use AI to do a large refactor on a big code base, you're going to get mixed results, right? Because, like, if you're going to refactor, like, the library upgrade has a lot of dependency and a lot of sub factors and a lot of things that go into it that the modern AI systems aren't as just the context windows aren't big enough to absorb an entire code base and factor in all the potential downstream impacts of it. But I don't think that lasts very long. I think there's a point in the very near future where these systems, like Amazon has a system called Q, which is pretty good at it. Not great, but very soon I think you'll see many more systems like that where we never do a library upgrade again. Like it just doesn't happen. And if systems continue to get better as fast as I expect they will, you won't worry. The other thing is that if the cost of writing software has plummeted so far, it no longer as I might be, it's no longer as important that I hit all of the points because fixing it is almost a trivial exercise. And so if it turns out it did miss something later, I can go back and fix it without having to worry about going through a release cycle or a whole development cycle. If I really can, I can build an app in 3 minutes. And it turns out my bar for that app is lower because I know that if it's something wrong with it, I can fix it in 30 seconds or throw it away and build a new one in 5 minutes.
Yeah, I wonder if our bottleneck in building software has been the typing the code and pushing it out the door to production, or the understanding what we really want and negotiating that across a bunch of sets of people inside an organization and pushing it out, right? Because if we now get faster at just doing the typing part, then we're still restricted by how many heads need to synchronize as to what this thing does. So the problem's going to like still remain, but we just need maybe less engineers to do it.
But what if you don't have to figure it out ahead of time anymore? Because the cost of engineering is so low, you can iterate on it. You don't have to know what you want when you start. You can figure it out along the way because the bar has plummeted so far. That was more what I was getting at, which is you can have software development can become this iterative, creative exploration process instead of a structured, deterministic, procedure.
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes in, where setting the right structures and processes for software development becomes super important, right? Like having done some vibe coding over the last few weeks, if you just purely just vibe it out, you end up with crap. Like 2 or 3 days into it, the AI is no longer able to perform in its own code because it's just too messy for it to make any changes successfully. So I reached the point with like a simple app, I had 6 web pages in and like a dozen endpoints, and it just could not proceed any further because I hadn't looked in the code and it was a mess, right? So you step back, clean it up, and then setting up there and saying, like, no, you will not make a REST endpoint unless you have clearly defined the types over here, here, and here, and make sure everyone's using them. That sort of stuff.
And so what happens though when that in a year when that's not true anymore, when it can do those things well?
I think it can do those things well now. You just have to kind of get it there. Like maybe in a year from now that will be built in. I think then it'll be in a much funner spot.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I wonder though how that works with the training. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, a funny example I was using Claude to build an app, and I was like, build this app, and it built the app. But if you started typing in any of the forms, every time you typed a letter, it lost focus. And if you've ever done React coding, it was clear what it was doing, which is every time you were doing a keystroke, it was resetting the state of the model. And so you had to like type a letter, click on the field, type a letter, click on the field. And I explained to Claude, this was the problem. Can you go fix it? And it's like, absolutely, I can go fix it. And it went and fixed it. And of course it didn't fix it. It still happened. I was like, cool, can you go fix it? Here's what the problem is. Can you go fix it? 5 times. It failed to fix it in the end. I just gave up and moved on. But what it made me realize was like, there's a world where it won't make those mistakes anymore. It will get good enough in probably a year from now frankly, based on how fast the research is proceeding, where like that will be an extremely rare failure case. And will I still know, because I won't have dealt with it so on what the problem is anymore? Like I know it because I made those mistakes in building React apps. But if it's been a year now and I haven't had to do it because it got good, will I even know what's wrong with it? Or I'll just start begging the AI, please fix it. And it'll be like, I fixed it. I'll be like, you did it, but I need you to fix it because I done what's wrong. Like that world is going to be interesting.
So today, actually speaking to the models progressing, so I had to dive into some code that I had not written today and go fix quite a few things. And I was working in Cursor and I was like, damn, Cursor's not feeling it today. The vibe is off. The vibe is real off. Right. And finally, like I find myself yelling at Cursor in the chats, right? Like, I probably should not swear at my IDE as much as I do, but I was like, bro, what, WTF is wrong with you? And then eventually it goes, oh, well, I'm Claude 2.5. And I was like,
You're talking to like a baby.
Dumb as dirt.
You got downgraded, man. Downgraded hard.
No, what was it? I don't remember. It was either 3.5 or 2.5.
Is YOLO mode able to change its own version?
Well,
It's
so
like,
then
I'm too good for this.
was-
You
it was-
need my little kid to do
It was
this.
3.5. It was 3.5. So then I bumped it to 3.7 and we were like cooking with gasoline. And
And that's like 3 weeks old, right? Like
Yeah.
the thing that was
That's
3
the
weeks
point.
old is unusable.
that's the point.
Yeah.
Is
The
you go
thinking
from
models are the ones that actually, the thinking models are fantastically better at multi-step procedures than the old models. It's actually not even a point of comparison anymore.
Yeah.
Although I do think it's funny that, I don't know if you've used good Claude web interface, there's a drop down. Which thinking mode do you want? Do you want like deep thinking mode or fast thinking mode? And every time I've thought about that, I'm like, how do I know before I start? Shouldn't you be figuring that out for me? Like, and someone was like, hey, I have two consultants. I have the good consultant or the bad consultant. Which one do you want? You're like, when do I not want the good consultant? Oh, they're expensive. I'm like, yeah, but I don't know.
I honestly use the fast one just because it's so much faster. And I find myself oftentimes back to something you said previously, Sean, I treat the majority of this code as throwaway and iterative. And so when I get to a point, and I can actually like explain what I did this past weekend, Sean, I was writing a CSV import AI.
Nice.
That would not, like you could just drop whatever the hell you wanted in. And as long as it was something recognizable in there, I even got it to the point where it would import off an image. Okay.
Nice.
And so Sean and I have an incredible amount of shared trauma
around CSV files.
My God. And but I was using coding agents. So I was using the small agents framework from Hugging Face. And I got to this point where these things were huge and unwieldy. And I like stopped and I started reading through and looking at the code, what they were doing. And then I went back to Claude because I was using 3.7. And I said, listen, you've broken the concerns the wrong way. This is extract, transform, and load. That's what we're supposed to be doing here. But you've conflated transform and half of transform and all of load into this agent down here. I want you to break everything apart and rebuild these. And it more or less
said no.
No, it didn't. It did it. And it was, what was really wild was it did it and it just worked. Now there were some other things that it was doing where I'll need to go back and be like, hey, this is not the right way to do this. So I was still directing it and I was still, telling it what to do. But it also, like, if I needed it to start over, the cost of starting over was really low. And so it like normally under a lot of circumstances, if I had written a few hundred lines of code and then decided I'm done, I'm going to restart this, I wouldn't do that. I would try to salvage it if it was me writing. But for this, it was like I would highlight something and say, you need to do this here, highlight something else, do this here. And then within like 20 seconds, it had rewritten 3 different agents and it just started working. And it was a pretty wild experience.
I mean, there's a world you can imagine where maintenance of software goes away because the cost of just tearing it down and building a new one from scratch is so low that there's no point in maintaining things that are already happening. It's like there are a lot of countries, like we live in the US, where we actually, if you buy a house, it's an asset, you're probably going to maintain it, improve it. There's a lot of countries where that is not how it works. You buy a house, you tear it down, and you build a new house. And there is no, houses are very recent because nobody keeps a house around. They're considered disposable because it's actually easier to just buy a house, tear it down, build the one you want, but you build them differently, right? You don't
Where
build
is
them
this
with
magical place?
a lot of places. In fact, Japan happens quite often where you
Really?
go, oh yeah, where houses are not seen as assets, and you're more likely to tear down a house and rebuild a new one where it is, and it happens a lot. I mean, it's a somewhat new development that houses are considered these assets that are going to be multi-generational and last so long. But it just, like, my point is, if you're building a house in an economy like that, you build it differently because it doesn't have to last for 100 years, right? All it has to last is 30, maybe. And that might be true of software.
Okay, so take that analogy a step further. We tend to spend a lot of time in America, focusing on how nice the house is. And to a degree, that can overshadow the actual property itself. And a lot of times you'll end up in a situation where you have a piece of land where, even though the piece of land does not move and cannot be, teleported, transported, whatever, the cost of the house on top of it is worth far more, even though it is a perishable kind of thing. If we take that analogy and we think of that as the product and the code, where the code is the house and now the product is the land, do we end up in a situation where, if software engineers move towards being more product focused, they become a better asset to a company? Or did I just torture that analogy?
Well, I'm not sure. Are there any places where the house is worth more than the land that it's on? I'm not familiar with any real estate markets in the US where that's true.
Our house.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think based on the current valuations, the structure is like $20,000 or $30,000 more than the land itself. I don't think it's going to be that way for much longer.
Interesting.
But there are places where the actual structure is worth more than the house.
So you would grab your house and move it somewhere else before you built something else.
Well, I mean, there's an absurdity to it, right? Where it's like, oh no, that doesn't make any sense.
I mean, economically, that sort of makes sense, right? Because the land has some value, the house has some value, and I could see that sort of flipping either way. What's really funny is where sometimes the value of the land is so much more than the value of the actual structure that you have, which is kind of weird because the one is based on pure supply and demand, while the other one is based on materials and whatnot. But the reason that I despise house analogies for software, and I think I've got several posts on that, is that a house is touchy-feely. You can look at it, and there's like a window in a room, and you can look at a room, and you know what the function of the room is. And with software, before AI, you couldn't do that, right? You look at some code, and you're like, I don't know what the frick this does, right? And you got to put it in production, instrument it, and maybe then you have some better idea of what this thing does. So a fun question to ponder is, does AI now give us better capabilities to analyze the software?
Yes.
And so we can know what it does, and maybe we can rebuild another one like this that is not the same. I don't know. My hunch is not quite there yet because they're not that good.
I did it today.
Well, limited, right? Like, not a huge app, but if I took like a 500,000 code app that has like 100 pages and does a bunch of stuff and said rewrite this,
that's
probably not going to end up in a good spot, right?
Yeah,
it's true, but I don't think it's very far before their systems are good enough that is. If you think about how far we've come and how fast these models are improving and how much we're learning about how to use them, I don't think it's far off that becomes the case. And I think, going back to Mike's point, I do think the role of an engineer or product manager merge, because you don't need someone who can spend all their time focusing on the code and the semantics and the language and the architecture and DevOps of it. But at the same time, the product, where the line between the product management of it and the building of it will blur. And I suspect that those roles become much more similar than they are today. Um, Especially if you don't have as large engineering teams. And so a product manager is no longer managing across this huge engineering team.
Yeah.
Like I don't know any startup company that is not currently considering cutting the number of engineers and shrinking their engineering team, which in my 30 years in this business is the first time in history software engineers are not a scarce commodity, and companies are thinking about shrinking the size of their engineering teams instead of not being able to hire as many engineers as they want. And that if that continues to its logical conclusion, yeah, you all of a sudden have this product engineer person whose job it is to understand the requirements, to use the tools to build the product and data around it. And how many of them you need, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to find out.
What is a great question, and then it's just gone.
That is a great question. AI, we should just ask AI note taker what you were thinking, and it probably knows.
Yeah, tell us the next question that was in Michael's head.
What was I supposed to say? Excuse me, Chad GPT. What was I going to ask?
He's unable to connect to this podcast still. Since 6 episodes ago when we last tried.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
It's so. Here's a question or a pondering. It seems like a lot of the developments here are happening with reinforcement learning. So to me, it's fascinating how you will have AI generated code that will be used to train what good code looks like to models that will then are going to generate more of that. And it's really interesting if you look at the sort of basics, right? They've been able to bootstrap where you have two AIs that know nothing, but the one can be the judge and the other one can be the executioner, and they can get to do something good together. I ponder how far we can carry that. Like, it's hard to bet against it because it looks pretty promising so far. I wonder, is that going to keep working, or is that going to be at some point junk in, junk out? How is that going to get improved? Or do you find some way where, because some of the tricks they do now is they do like a little bit of human plus reinforcement learning, where you see that the reinforcement with some humans, you introduce a little bit more humans, so you can judiciously apply humans to make the reinforcer better.
Well, to your point, I don't think people realize how many humans are currently employed to teach systems how to do things well. It's kind of amazing. The armies and armies of people whose job it now is to teach these models or create the training data for them. But to your point, you guys remember the AlphaGo project from years ago? This was the system that was the first system that was able to beat human masters at Go, which is a very complicated
Move
game.
37, baby.
Oh yeah. Well, so to that point, I mean, the innovation of AlphaGo that was so interesting was that they didn't teach it how to play Go based on the history of how humans play Go. It created an adversarial environment where it played itself enough to learn how to play Go, and it learned how to play Go in a way that's totally different than the way humans do. And since then, there's been a lot of other examples of how adversarial learning that way in reinforcement systems. There doesn't look like there is an end. It looks like they can approach what we might consider perfect intelligence in specific domains. But it does mean that the systems of tomorrow may write code that doesn't look anything like the code that we would write. And we might not understand how it's coding in the same way that with 30 said, like what is this? It turned out it was the right thing, but nobody understood it because it was so different. That will happen. And in that world, like, what happens if something goes wrong? There won't be a human to jump in to figure it out. It'll be, hopefully our systems are good enough to fix themselves.
Yeah. How long do either of you think it will take before humans won't understand the code that's being written?
It's going to be scary when it's running like the water supply or the food network.
Or if there is code being written.
Well, I think that's unfair because honestly, like, I don't know if the last time you guys wrote C++ code, but like even virtual machine byte code, like you have no idea what it's doing, right? It's abstraction and abstraction and abstraction, and the byte code's running the virtual machine, which is running instructions. Like, I haven't done any of that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're already at a point where we don't know what our code is doing. We're just talking about another level of abstraction. I think a better point, like I consider much more of like what happens when we understand the abstraction is so deep and we understand so little that we actually can't fix the problems anymore. That we can't intercede as humans if there's a failure state and kind of correct it. Like in your example, Mike, like there's a world where instead of a few agents, it built a system with 100,000 agents.
Right.
Right. And you can't possibly understand what all 100,000 of them are doing to know which one is broken. And if so, the AI system can't fix it. Nobody can fix it.
But maybe you just throw it all away and start over.
Well, no, but take the analogy. Let's say you have a bug in your linker, right? So you write some code in abstraction up here, and like the wrong bit ends down there, right? So eventually you would debug that and find out, oh, that's it. You wouldn't go in and fix the binary code. You'd go like fix the linker and rerun the process. So I think in the same way, if the AI spat you something that wasn't working, you would have to debug why that's not working to some extent. And then, go tell the AI to do it again. So if the AI isn't able to fix it, then you'd go need to fix the AI and fix it. But I don't think you have another choice there, right?
I mean, you asked the AI to try again.
Yeah. What you could do is if you had some kind of critical system that needed to work and you don't understand how it works, maybe you now have the AI build you 3 of those. So if like one goes down, maybe one of the others that's written a different way could give you the same results and test the crap out of it.
And like, so to your point, a reinforcement learning, like often we'll build a few models and have them compete with each other. And you're right. The way it works tomorrow, it might build a bunch of versions of whatever you asked it for. It may test it internally and not tell you it built 3 of them. It just shows you the one that performed the best.
So what you're telling me is that we're going to quickly be entering the stage of software development where if you can dodge a wrench,
you can dodge a ball.
You can dodge a ball.
I was going to say more. There's a reason why there's 3 people in this podcast, and then why you're going to bump me off soon is you're like, listen, we were just looking for the best 2 out of 3, and turns out Sean didn't make the cut. So,
all right. So I tend to think a lot about what motivates people and how people will be feeling in this moment. And one of the things I keep coming back to is, there's a lot of my friends are finding themselves without jobs. It's scary. I found myself in that position 1.5, 2 years ago now, and it's scary. And I have come away with a lot of, like, as Thanos and I have talked through a lot of this, I have come away with less angst about what this is going to mean for individual software engineers. And I would love your take on it, Sean, which is basically this. We are currently in a place where, the need for individual software engineers in these large corporations is diminishing. But my sense is also that is now, because of the way the tools work, it is going to be so much easier for an individual software engineer to build an entire product that mom and pop store down the road now actually get access to really good software at a cost-effective price, and that individual engineers can now actually make software kind of more egalitarian. I mean, is that pie in the sky? I'm looking at, beautiful ideas and you think we're screwed? Or, I mean, I know you think we're screwed.
I do think, even beyond software, I think we're looking at, we systematically over the course of technology development have seen massive dislocations in labor, right? The Industrial Revolution was one, the internet was another. Like the pre and post internet, like there's jobs that just went away, just don't exist anymore. And we're going to see that now. We're in the beginning innings of seeing that happen. And it is going to mean that there's a lot of people with skill sets like software engineers where there won't be jobs for them. And like I said, over the last 30 years, software engineering has always been in demand. If you were a software engineer, you could find a job. That won't be true anymore. And it's going to be a massive dislocation. And retraining of a large part of the workforce like that takes time, and sometimes takes a whole generational turnover. It can be very traumatic if you look at previous times this has happened. I am optimistic about what happens in our economy and in business if the cost of creating software goes down so much as everything does, which is, I think, where it's coming. But I think that mom and pop store is not going to have access to great software. I think what's going to happen is more people will have access to mediocre software, and that in and of itself will be good. But I don't think those individual software engineers, there won't be enough jobs. Like they're going to have to go somewhere and do something. Like my best example of this is like bagels. Like bagel making used to be an enormously highly paid artisanal job, which was very hard to do. You learned about it, got paid very well for it. And then the invention of the bagel machine wiped out an entire category of labor, but it made everybody's bagels available. Now, I never had a pre-bagel machine bagel. I'm told, and what you read is that they were much better when they were artisanal made. You could, in theory, you can find them somewhere. I've never found one. So we have access to lower quality bagels, but you can buy them by the dozen in the supermarket and have as many as you want. And the bagel maker suffered the most. The population benefited, but we also lost track of what an amazing artisanal bagel would be like. I think that's true here too.
So we get a bunch of mediocre bagels, lost bagel makers, but everybody gets a bagel.
Yeah, which is the history of technological progress.
And ladies and gentlemen, a podcast with Sean.
I mean, if it's not coming through, I'm optimistic. I mean, imagine what you can build now if the cost of building it is almost nothing. Like, we will see a lot of new things built. I don't think that it'll be enough to handle the displacement of the workforce, but it's going to change everything in other ways. I mean, every step in our technological progress, the Industrial Revolution, the internet, has made life better for people. And I think this is true. It's just the short-term dislocation is very painful and difficult to adjust to.
Right. So I actually, I will say this. I do agree. I think that sitting as a potential bagel maker here, wondering to myself, is this still the career? Which is why I have thought a lot about doubling down on being expert witnesses in lawsuits, because people are going to just continue to sue each other, man. Like, it's great.
No, podcasting is a great career for you, man. You just have to hold on to the listeners you got. And
That's right. I would like to end our little episode here with a quote from the TechCrunch article, and it was from the general partner at Y Combinator, I believe. She said this amazing quote talking about vibe coding. Okay. You have to have the taste and enough training to know that an LLM is spitting bad stuff or good stuff. In order to do vibe coding, you still need to have taste and knowledge to judge good versus bad. And in the back of my mind, all I can see is Eminem stepping up onto the stage after having mom's spaghetti. Like, all things about to become a rap battle.
You have to connect those. We need AI to connect the dots here. This little discontinuous jump there, man.
No, it's the whole taste and spit good, spit bad. I really enjoyed that. All right. Well, we normally
here's a thought experiment for you, Mike. Just 30 seconds quickly. What if what this means is, instead of you using the same, I don't know, word, instead of us all using Google Docs at the same interface, we all have our own Google Docs. We have a version that's specific to our tastes. And instead of us all using the same web browser, we have a web browser that's specific to our tastes. There's a world where, like, people talk a lot in the media industry about how streaming means, like, there's so many things, you only watch the things that are unique to what you're interested in. Software could be the same way, where we no longer all using the same software. We're using something that's very specific to our needs. In that world, I'm not sure you're having some sort of abstract sense of good taste matters. You get to decide what your taste is and what you want. And, it's a really interesting future to ponder.
I already cannot use my kids' iPads because they have these themes where all the icons look the same.
There you go.
And so if they now just not only didn't look different, but they just behave different, I'd be screwed. Yeah. Like, there's no way to interact with this device that belongs to someone else.
Does that mean I can finally create Rollins OS?
Probably.
You have
as long as you promise that you're the only one to use it. Sure, go ahead, have fun.
There's a whole family of us, man. Just wait. All right. So, any final thoughts, comments, questions, criticisms, concerns, queries, quandaries?
I will reiterate what I said before. I think it's going to be very interesting to see in a world where the job market for engineers has changed for the first time in 30 years. And there's going to be a lot of downstream effects we can't predict right now. Like, I think you're right, Mike. There probably will be a burst of startup companies as people create their own jobs, and a lot of them will fail. And it's going to be a season of change for at least the next 5 years as we try to adjust and absorb it. And that's going to be interesting to find out.
Woo! Exciting.
Yeah. Don't be the engineer that's like, yeah, I don't need to use that. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yes. So, all right. Ladies and gentlemen, humans of Earth, thank you for riding along with us on Will AI Snap That. Once again, my name is Michael Rollins, and I am joined by my co-host, Thanos, he of the Snapdom. And you have been listening to the dulcet tones of Sean Byrnes for the entire show. He who brings joy and happiness and great things like that, as well as CSVs. And with that, we hope that you will find your joy with your robotic overlord as well, because maybe you can make your own robotic overlord. Good night.
Does AI have a BBC voiceover artist accent? I don't.
Just run with it.